What happens when an unstoppable brand of confidence meets a host whose superpower is staying calm? In a studio scented with espresso and rubber mats under the red glow of an on-air sign, Meghan Markle sits down across from Joe Rogan, ready to set the record straight. The headphones go on, the waveform spikes, and within minutes, a simple question about influence turns into a surgical argument about truth, fame, and ego. The studio looked exactly like the thousands of screenshots people had shared online, mismatched curios on shelves, a skull or two in the background, neon accents that hummed faintly, and that stubbornly warm lighting that made everything feel like a late-night kitchen table. Rogan's team moved like a pit crew, quiet, competent, invisible the second they weren't needed. Joe took his seat with the loose shoulders of someone who'd logged more than a lifetime of hours behind a microphone. Meghan arrived 5 minutes before call time, wearing precision-like armor, cream blazer, clean lines, confidence for days. She shook hands with the producer as though accepting an award. When Joe stepped forward, grinning, palms open, she offered a practiced smile that never fully reached her eyes. "Appreciate you coming," Joe said. "I think we'll have fun." "Fun would be nice," she replied, adjusting the headphones. "I don't get that a lot from interviews." A red halo sprang to life on air. Joe started like he always did, light and hospitable. "All right, friends, today's conversation is one I've been curious about for a while. Meghan Markle is here. We're going to talk influence, responsibility, the modern media ecosystem, maybe even mushrooms. Who knows?" "Not mushrooms," Meghan said with a tiny laugh that had no air in it. "Let's keep it elevated." Joe chuckled. "We can do elevated. So, when you think about the last few years, what's the most misunderstood thing about you?" "That I need to be understood," she answered without pause. "I don't. I'm not a product to be decoded. The obsession with categorizing me is the problem, Joe. People want simplicity because it's easier than nuance." Joe nodded. "Nuance is the entire point of long-form conversation." "Exactly," she said, as if she'd invented the format, "which is why I'm here, to talk, not to be boxed." "Cool," Joe said. "Let me ask you something that's probably on a lot of people's minds. When you step into a media moment, and you've stepped into a lot of them, how much of it is messaged, and how much is just you being you?" She sat a little taller. "And there is no divide. I am the message. My existence challenges narratives that were never built to include me." A beat. Joe waited. That line could mean 100 different things. He tried to distill. "So when critics say some of your big sit-downs felt curated is what professionals call prepared," she cut in. "Men get to be prepared. Women get accused of staging." Joe kept his voice warm. "Or maybe people just pick up on production. You know, lighting, edits, the music cues. That's not a gender thing. That's TV." "It becomes gendered when the subject is me," she said. "I've noticed that pattern. You should too." He glanced at the producer's glass. The waveform stuttered like a heartbeat. "Okay," Joe said, pivoting. "Let's talk responsibility. You have a massive platform. When you advocate, say, for mental health, do you ever worry your personal experience gets translated as universal advice?" "You mean, do I worry that I'm too influential?" she asked, straight-faced. "I mean that personal stories can be powerful and also incomplete," Joe clarified. "People hear them as prescriptions." "That's a framing problem," she replied, "not a me problem. If someone hears me describe my reality and decides it's a universal rule, that's on the listener or the media environment teaching them to flatten women's experiences into tropes." Joe took a breath that could easily have become a sigh. "I don't flatten people. I ask questions. It's kind of my job. And it's kind of my job to remind you that not every question deserves the dignity of an answer," she said sweetly. "Asking can also be a way of centering you, not the subject." The temperature dipped. Joe felt it. He'd navigated fighters bristling before a bout, comedians mid-spiral, scientists whose lives had shrunk to one obsession. He knew a defensive rhythm when he heard it. The trick was to lower the shoulders without lowering the bar. "Look," he said, hands open. "I'm not trying to center me. I want to understand you beyond headlines. People tune in because they can smell scripted talking points. They want the human thing. I'm giving you the human thing," she said, eyes cool. "It just happens to be more disciplined than you're used to." There was that word again, discipline, delivered like a verdict. Joe tried a different angle. "You talk a lot about agency," he said. "What's a decision you made in the last year that surprised even you?" She considered, then didn't. "Deciding to come here." He barked a laugh. "Why?" Because I knew you'd be charming about it, she said. You'd say you're just curious, just a guy having conversations. But curiosity without context reenacts harm. It's the friendly face of extraction. Joe blinked. Extraction? You get views, you get clips, you get to say, I platform everyone. Meanwhile, I get dissected by people who were never gonna listen in good faith. That's extraction. He felt the subtle shift where dialogue becomes a courtroom. He chose patience. I think people who listen to long-form shows actually do come in good faith, he said. They stick around for hours. That's not hate scrolling, that's attention. Attention is respect. Attention is a commodity, she countered. Respect is evidenced by restraint. If someone tells you the terms, you honor them. I'm honoring them, Joe said evenly. I'm honoring you by asking you to go deeper than a press release. An edged smile. No one said you're entitled to depth. The producer's eyes flicked up. Joe kept his gaze on Meghan. He'd sparred with ideologues, zealots, drop-ins who loved the heat of the lamps more than the work of thinking. He wasn't going to add volume, he would add clarity. Okay, he said. What are the terms you want honored right now? That we don't play the bad faith game, she replied. No insinuations disguised as questions. No, some people say. If you have a point, make it. Own it. Fair enough, Joe said, and here's a direct one. Do you think some of the backlash you've received is connected to how controlled you appear in high-profile moments? People feel like they're meeting a brand, not a person. She tilted her chin like looking over a balcony. People mistaking composure for calculation is not my job to fix. If authenticity now means chaos, I'll pass. So your public self is the most authentic version of you? Joe asked. It's the most considerate, she said. Considerate of myself. Boundaries are not PR, they're mental health. A thoughtful point delivered like a slamming door. He nodded anyway. Boundaries are good. I'm just saying that conversation, real conversation, requires some vulnerability. Otherwise, it's a press conference. And yet here you are, she said, confusing vulnerability with access. He held her gaze. I'm confusing nothing. I'm asking for something unscripted. I don't do unscripted, she said, smiling like a blade. I do intentional. A silence hung, elastic and audible in the headphones. Joe broke it with a lighter tone. Intentional is good. Let's be intentional about something practical. Young people look up to you. If a 20-year-old says, I want purpose like yours, what's the first concrete habit you give them? Stop asking permission, she said. From parents, from bosses, from strangers online, especially from men with microphones. Joe laughed despite himself. That's a good line. It's not a line, it's instruction. Okay, instruction taken. He leaned in, voice warm again. Second habit. Refuse false choices, she said. I'm tired of being told I must be either grateful or critical, soft or strong, private or public. I can be both. I am both. That's human, Joe agreed. But when bothness becomes a shield, I'm both, so I'm beyond critique. People push back. She shook her head slowly. You're projecting. People push back because I won't play the character they wrote for me. And what character do you think I'm asking for? The one who cries on cue, she said. The one who slips and gives you a viral moment. The one who feels small next to your brand of big-hearted masculinity. Joe's eyes softened. I don't want you small. I want you real. Real is not the property of your audience, she said evenly. Real is mine to define. He glanced toward the red light, still glowing, still patient. He thought of every episode where a guest arrived armored and left lighter. Sometimes that happened because he pushed. Sometimes because he didn't. With Meghan, pushing felt like leaning against glass. You could see everything. You couldn't get through. Let me try this, Joe said, palms up. What's the last thing you changed your mind about? She didn't blink. Whether to do this. You changed your mind? I told my team I wouldn't, she said. Then I thought, no, why yield ground? Why let the narrative play out without me? So I came. It was a gift to me? Joe asked. To your listeners, she said. They deserve better examples of women setting terms. He smiled thinly. I think they deserve honest back and forth. And they're getting it, she said. You're pushing your angle, I'm refusing it. That's the back and forth. He could feel the hour pulling toward a shape, one he recognized. The show where the conversation never touches earth. The one where the guest keeps mistaking curiosity for attack. The one where the host has to decide whether to rescue the vibe or defend the premise. Joe chose the premise. Meghan, he said, gentle but firm, I don't invite people here to trap them. I invite them because conversation is one of the last places we practice being human together. If you interpret every question as an imposition, we won't get anywhere. She folded her hands like a verdict. Then let's get nowhere beautifully. The waveform spiked and steadied. Somewhere outside the glass, someone exhaled. Joe reset in his chair, rolling his shoulders, feeling the familiar burn of a conversation that wanted to be theater. He spoke into the mic with the careful patience of a man threading a needle in an earthquake. All right, he said, let's keep going. The second hour began with a reset. Joe adjusted his mic, sipped his coffee, and tried to find that easy rhythm his listeners loved. Half philosophy, half barbershop banter. Meghan crossed her legs, exuding poise so sharp it could slice glass. She'd spent the break on her phone, scrolling with the self-assuredness of someone both controlling and documenting her own narrative. All right, Joe began with a friendly grin. So Meghan, we've talked about perception and influence. Let's pivot a little. You've spoken about mental resilience and self-care. What does that look like for you day to day? Meghan gave a small laugh, half amusement, half condescension. Joe, it's not a checklist. It's a mindset. You don't wake up and say, time to be resilient. You are resilient. It's innate. Sure, Joe said, nodding. But I think a lot of people listening might want something concrete, like how do you handle stress? Do you meditate, journal, cold plunges, something like that? See, that's the difference between you and me, she replied, her tone suddenly clipped. You want a sound bite. I'm living the experience. I don't have to brand my healing routine. Joe raised an eyebrow. I'm not asking for branding. I'm asking for something people can relate to. Relatability, she repeated with a wry smile. That word again. Everyone wants to relate to someone they're secretly resenting. There it was, the flicker of disdain that caught the mic like static. Joe took a slow breath, deliberately patient. I think people are curious, not resentful. They want to understand how someone like you, under that much pressure, keeps going. Well, Joe, she said, straightening her blazer, I don't crumble when people underestimate me. That's the difference. Fair, Joe said, still calm, but sometimes talking through what grounds you can inspire others. Her gaze hardened. I think they should inspire themselves. He smiled slightly. You don't think you've ever inspired someone? She shrugged. Maybe, but I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not here to babysit the public's emotions. Joe blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. That's a bit cold, isn't it? Honest, she corrected. There's a difference. He chuckled under his breath. I'm all for honesty, but I think empathy still has a place. Meghan's tone turned silk and steel. Empathy, yes, but not emotional labor, especially not for people who have made careers dissecting me. Joe leaned forward. You think this conversation is dissection? I think it's veiled intrusion, she said. Every question you ask assumes there's a version of me you deserve to access. That's not empathy, Joe. That's entitlement. He paused, letting the words hang. The podcast's quiet hum filled the silence. Just air, electricity, and a tension thick enough to choke on. Meghan, he said softly, I've had everyone on this show. Scientists, comedians, soldiers, people who have lost everything. Every one of them came here to talk because they wanted to share something real. I'm not entitled to that. I just try to meet people where they are. Exactly, she said, crossing her arms. You try, but you can't meet me where I am, Joe. You've never been there. The dismissal was surgical. Joe leaned back, nodding slowly as if digesting a difficult truth. You're right, he said finally. I've never been royal, never been under that spotlight, but I've been misunderstood. I've been called things I'm not. She smiled thinly. You chose that. Spotlight. I was born into it. Yeah, but you left it, he countered gently. That was a choice, right? Meghan's expression tightened. It was survival. You don't choose to leave toxicity, you escape it. Okay, Joe said, voice steady. So now that you're out, do you ever feel like you've built a different kind of spotlight? One you control, but still one that burns? Her lips parted slightly. You love your metaphors? He chuckled. They help people think. They help you dodge accountability, she snapped. There it was, the first sharp edge of real anger. Joe felt it hit like a spark to dry wood. Accountability for what? He asked, genuinely confused. For the way you platform people, she said. You disguise it as curiosity, but you're feeding the spectacle. You've turned conversations into content. Joe tilted his head. That's kind of the definition of a podcast. She exhaled sharply. See, you think that's clever. That's the problem. He kept his tone measured, unflappable. No, I think that's honest. Everything's content now. Your posts, my shows, this conversation. The question is whether there's meaning behind it. Meaning doesn't exist in mass consumption, she shot back. It's noise. You can't monetize authenticity. Joe smirked faintly. Tell that to your Netflix deal. The air in the room froze. The producer's eyes darted up from behind the glass. Meghan gave a slow, incredulous laugh. Wow, she said. You really went there. You mentioned authenticity, Joe said evenly. I'm just saying, the lines get blurry for everyone, not just you. You think you're the first man to question my integrity? She said, her voice low but sharp. You're not even in the top 10. Joe's hands folded, the calm of someone walking through a verbal minefield. I'm not questioning it, I'm exploring it. You're performing it, she said. Pretending curiosity isn't just control with better PR. He paused, meeting her gaze. You think I'm trying to control you? I think you're trying to humanize me on your terms, she replied, which is worse. The silence stretched again. Joe could feel the tension gripping the air like static electricity vibrating around them. But unlike other tense moments he'd diffused before, this one didn't feel reparable. Meghan wasn't looking to be understood, she was defending a fortress. He tried one last olive branch. I actually think people would love to understand your terms. That's why they listen. They listen because you tell them who to listen to, she said coldly. You build the arena and sell the tickets. I'm just the show. Joe exhaled slowly. Then why agree to come here? She smiled, a flash of triumph and mockery. To remind the audience that I'm not theirs or yours. Joe looked directly into the camera lens, his jaw tightening just slightly. The waveform on the monitor trembled like it knew what was coming. He turned back to her with professional restraint. All right, he said, then let's see if we can still find a little truth in all this. Meghan leaned forward, voice dripping with confidence. The truth is simple, Joe. I don't owe anyone, especially men with microphones, my vulnerability. Joe nodded once, controlled and unshaken. Then maybe this isn't the right place for you. And just like that, the conversation shifted. Not quite an explosion, just the unmistakable sound of two worlds closing off from each other. The red on-air light still glowed, but something else in the room had gone completely dark. The third segment began with silence. One of those silences that wasn't accidental. Joe's producer had muted the ambient background track, leaving only the hum of air conditioning and the faint squeak of Meghan's chair as she crossed her legs again. The tension from the previous exchange hadn't dissolved, it had simply evolved, crystallizing into something sharper. Joe leaned toward the mic with the kind of weary composure that comes only from years of navigating unpredictable guests. All right, he said lightly. Let's reset a little. Meghan, I know you're not a fan of the spectacle, but this show at its best isn't about spectacle. It's about conversation. You can talk about whatever you want. Let's start there. What do you want to talk about? Meghan didn't look at him. She adjusted her sleeve instead. You mean you want me to steer the conversation so you can pretend this was always my idea? Joe chuckled quietly. You're a tough guest, you know that? She finally looked up. I'm a woman who refuses to be patronized. I'm not patronizing you, Joe said calmly. I'm just trying to understand why a conversation has to feel like a fight. Because for women like me, she replied, every question is a fight. You just don't recognize it because you've never been on the other end of one. Joe leaned back slightly. I've had plenty of fights, he said. They just usually involve people trying to win arguments, not prove their existence. That line landed. Meghan's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, surprise then disdain. So now I'm proving my existence. That's cute. Joe kept his tone light. I'm saying you don't have to. People already know who you are. Do they? She said with a hollow laugh. Or do they know who the tabloids told them I am? Who talk shows painted me as? Who men like you dissect for ratings? Joe exhaled through his nose, rubbing his thumb against his palm. You came on my show, he said gently. I didn't drag you here. I came here, she said sharply, because I wanted to show the world what happens when a woman refuses to be edited. Well, Joe said, so far you're doing a hell of a job showing that. There was laughter in his tone, but none in hers. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You think that's funny? I think it's ironic, Joe said. You're here to prove you can't be controlled, but you're treating every word like a weapon. Maybe nobody's trying to control you. Maybe people are just trying to talk to you. Meghan's smile returned, tight and deliberate. That's the illusion of men like you, Joe. You think you're inviting dialogue, but you're really staging dominance. He blinked. Dominance? You ask, I answer. You control the framing, the sound levels, the editing, the reach. You get to define what I meant. That's control. Joe tilted his head. So when I ask a question, I'm exercising power, not curiosity. Exactly, she said. And when I resist, I'm labeled difficult. He smiled faintly. You said it, not me. Her eyes flashed. So now I'm difficult and defensive. Maybe I should just smile more for your audience, right? Joe spread his hands in surrender. Hey, I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to have a good faith conversation. And I'm trying, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, to have an intelligent one. The red on-air light reflected in Joe's eyes like a small sun. He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. You know, Meghan, I've talked with everyone, from astrophysicists to MMA champions, and not once did someone call curiosity an attack. That's because they weren't women, she said. They weren't asked to bleed to prove they were human. Joe's eyebrows raised slightly. You really think I'm asking you to bleed? I think you want access, she said. And when I don't give it, you interpret that as arrogance, but really it's boundaries. Joe sat back, folding his arms. Boundaries are great, but when every question hits a wall, it stops being a conversation. Maybe that's your problem, she said coldly. You think access equals depth. Some of us don't perform vulnerability on demand. He nodded slowly. So this, he gestured around the studio, isn't a conversation, it's a test. It's a mirror, she said. And you don't like what it shows you. There was something almost cinematic about the pause that followed. Joe's hand hovered near his mug, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen debates crumble, egos detonate, tempers explode. But Meghan was something different. She wasn't just reacting, she was weaponizing control. He decided to take one last swing, measured, respectful, human. Okay, he said quietly. If you had one message to give people who still doubt you, what would it be? Meghan smiled, finally relaxing into her chair. I don't need to convince doubters. That's a man's game. I exist beyond doubt. Must be peaceful up there, Joe said under his breath. She heard it. You see, that's what I mean, she shot back. You can't handle confidence in a woman. Without calling it ego, Joe looked her straight in the eye. Confidence is earned, Meghan. Ego demands the room bow first. That did it. The calm cracked. You're unbelievable, she said. Do you even hear yourself? You've interrupted, you've misrepresented, and now you're lecturing me on humility. Joe's voice dropped deep and even. I haven't interrupted once. And if you feel misrepresented, maybe it's because the only version of you that feels safe is the one where you're never challenged. Her mouth opened, but no words came for a moment. Just that flash. Anger, pride, disbelief. Finally, she said, you think you're so grounded, don't you? The everyman with a microphone, the philosopher for the gym bros. You think staying calm makes you right. Joe gave a quiet half smile. No, it just keeps me from saying what I'm really thinking. Say it, she dared, leaning forward. He met her stare. I think you mistake resistance for strength. The silence hit like a gunshot. Even the producer froze behind the glass. Meghan blinked once, twice, before letting out a humorless laugh. Well, she said, now that's a headline, isn't it? Not if you don't make it one, Joe replied. Don't worry, she said coolly. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. I'm sure you will, he said, his tone still maddeningly composed. And with that, the third act of the podcast came to an uneasy close. Joe leaned back, arms crossed, while Meghan stared down the table like it was a chessboard she refused to lose on. The waveform monitor pulsed softly, recording every breath, every glare, every ounce of ego between them. And somewhere off mic, a producer whispered the words everyone was thinking. Man, this one's going to trend. The final minutes began like a standoff. The red on-air light still burned overhead, but the air had gone stale, too heavy for breathing, too sharp for saving. Joe sat back with his hands folded, his patience worn, but still present. Meghan, arms crossed, stared him down with that look that said, "I'm done pretending this is mutual." So Joe began slowly, voice low but steady. "I think we've covered a lot today. Control, confidence, the press, your boundaries." Meghan tilted her head, her tone dripping with finality. "And your ego?" Joe smirked faintly. "I've got one, sure, it comes with a mic, but I also know when to turn it off." "Oh, that's convenient," she said. "You get to decide when the power dynamic ends." He exhaled. "You really think this is about power? It always is," she said, "especially when a man feels challenged." Joe nodded once. "You're right about one thing. This is about challenge, but not because you're a woman, Meghan, because you came in here acting like a conversation is an interrogation, and then blame me for asking questions." Meghan laughed softly, but it wasn't friendly. "You sound like every man who's ever been uncomfortable with a woman who doesn't play along." "Maybe," Joe said, "or maybe I sound like someone who's tired of pretending arrogance is empowerment." That landed. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was final. The kind of silence that meant someone had finally had enough. Joe glanced toward the control booth. "Cut the feed," he said quietly. The producer hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," Joe replied, still looking at Meghan. "We're done here." Meghan leaned back, unbothered or pretending to be. "Running away already?" "No," Joe said, pushing his chair back. "Ending it before it turns into something uglier. You came here for validation, not a conversation. That's not what I do." She arched an eyebrow. "So this is how you handle women who won't flatter you?" "This is how I handle guests who mistake hostility for honesty," Joe said, standing up. "Now the show's over." The producer's hand dropped to the switch. The on-air light flickered, then went dark. Meghan sat there a moment longer, her reflection faint in the glass, jaw tight, eyes flashing with something between pride and fury. "You'll regret that," she said finally. Joe smiled faintly. "I doubt it." And with that, he walked off the set, leaving her alone in the quiet studio, lit only by the soft red glow fading out above her head. Outside, the sound engineer muttered under his breath, "Well, that'll break the internet." Inside, Meghan adjusted her blazer, fixed her hair, and whispered just loud enough for the microphones that were no longer recording. They always do. Fade to black. If you enjoyed this intense showdown between confidence and composure, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. More dramatic, real talk stories are coming your way soon. Which side were you on this time, Meghan's or Joe's? Let us know in the comments.